Welcome to Five Questions. Today we have Tim Archer with us, and he works for Herald of Truth Ministries. He's also an author and a blogger. And so he's going to answer five questions regarding the relationship between ministers and elders. But before we do that, Tim, introduce yourself to everyone.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tim Archer. Um, Grew up in Texas, went to Abilene Christian University, did 15 years in Argentina, uh, lived there. I shouldn't say did, that makes it sound like a chore. Lived there. My wife is from Argentina and really enjoyed our time there. We came back to the States in 2002. And since 2006, I've been with Herald of Truth. I'm now over all of the international ministries at Herald of Truth.
Yeah. So yeah, you do a lot of traveling with that. I think primarily to South
I really
America.
did. Yeah.
Okay. So when we jump in here, you're an elder. I'm a minister. We're not supposed to get along. You know.
No, no, I'm on the dark side.
Yeah. You know, talking to a lot of ministers, it seems to me, and I hope this is not the case, but um, in at least the majority of relationships between ministers and elders are somewhat strained. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think we see that in most working relationships. I start to say business. You hate to compare it to business per se, but even in academics and whatever, um, when someone has to make decisions that affect someone else, there's going to be tension.
Mm.
I know that my wife was talking with, she teaches at Abilene Christian, and she was talking with the head of her department. And she said, I just had to get used to the fact that people weren't always going to like me. That sometimes I was going to have to make the right decision, even if it wasn't the popular decision.
Yeah. Okay. Um, when these relationships are strained between the minister and the elder, how does that affect the congregation, or does it?
Well, so much has to do with how it's handled. Because the strain can be handled recognizing that it's going to exist, recognizing it's a normal part of a relationship, and not letting things become personal. Trying to say, okay, just because I decide that your sermon should be less than 30 minutes, for example, uh, that's not anything against you. I'm trying to balance out the needs of the congregation. And
Mm.
so if you can look at it that way and even say, hey, I don't agree. I don't think that's what the congregation needs, but I don't think you're attacking me, and I'm going to argue against your viewpoint based on reason and not just getting defensive about it. And that's hard to do. It's hard for me to do. I find myself getting uptight when someone disagrees with me, or when I'm entering a conversation where I know the other person isn't going to like what I say. I get very uptight.
Mm.
I don't deal well with that. And I know there's a lot of people that don't. And I think that isn't just ministers and elders, but it gets more complicated because it's not just church life, it's also livelihood for the minister in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a great relationship with my elders. And this last week we had to have a meeting that wasn't scheduled, talking about a significant theological doctrine, and it seemed prior to the meeting that we were in disagreement. At least several people in the room. But one of the things I love, and maybe why I love my eldership, is one of the individuals who was on the opposite side of myself said, "Yeah, we're going to enter into this meeting, and we may disagree. We may come out of this meeting, on in different positions, but we're still going to love one another. We're still going to be unified as leadership, and as a congregation, and that was just kind of the mentality going into the meeting, and I thought, that helped a lot.
Hmm. Well, the other day I told one of our ministers, I said, in public, I'm always going to have your back.
Hmm.
Because we had been in a meeting and he was being accused of some things, and I stepped up and defended him. And I said, when I have a problem with you, we're going to talk about it privately. I'm not going to bring it up in a group setting. Definitely not going to bring it up to the whole congregation. I'm going to come to your office. We're going to shut the door and we're going to talk about it. But publicly, I want people to see that your elders are behind you, that we're not working against you in any way.
Yeah, I think that's so important. There have been times, I've been with the congregation almost 10 years now, when the elders make a decision and I may not agree with that decision in the elders meeting, but as soon as I come out of that meeting and I have to speak before the congregation, I'm submitting to the elders. I'm, behind whatever their decision was 100%. And any disagreements that I have are only spoken to the elders and not to the congregation, not to, people within the congregation. We kind of hash that out in the meeting, and then, going forward, we're unified.
And that's something we try to do as an eldership,
Yeah.
that we never come out saying, well, I don't agree, but the elders voted to such and such. That's not a healthy way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of being a member of a church,
Yeah.
that you need to be willing to own what your church is doing. I think when we begin talking about the church in the third person, say, well, they are doing this and they are doing that, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
We don't feel a part, and we're not including ourselves as part of the church.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
I think you're so right, and I think, as at least my belief, that we really, there's lots of talk in the Bible about submission. I think a lot of times we don't like to talk about that nowadays. But my position is that submission is only submission when we're going along with something that we don't agree upon. If we were agreeing upon it already, we're not really submitting, because we were going to do that as it is. It's only when, I don't like what the elders do, or I don't like what this person does, I'm going to submit myself to them, and then go along with it.
And also the use of the phrase "bear with one another."
Oh yeah.
That implies that we're not always going to agree.
Yeah.
And church would be very simple if we always agreed.
Yeah.
But I think it's even healthier because, like it or not, I'm not always right. Even though at the time I think I am.
Yeah.
But many times in hindsight, I say, you know what? The other guys knew better, or sometimes it's, well, you know what? I was right, and we did something else, but that's okay. I mean, we'll move ahead,
Yeah. Well, thinking about this relationship between elders and ministers, what's something that elders can do to improve their relationship with ministers?
I think we need to spend time praying for our ministers. I think we need to spend time praying with our ministers. I think we need social interaction, especially, I'm a big believer in the concept of breaking bread together in the Bible. And I think that eating with other people is very important. One thing I like, we have a new preacher. And one thing I like that he's doing is, we have 10 elders. And so every week he's going to lunch with a different elder. And we had lunch last week, and he jokingly said, "See you in 10 weeks." Which, of course, we're going to see each other before then. But
Yeah.
It's good to know we have that time, and that we're going to have an informal time. And when I met with him, the first thing we talked about was his wife's about to have a baby, and he wanted to talk about what it's like when your wife has a baby.
Yeah.
And so we're not just talking church stuff. We're talking life, and we're treating each other as human beings, and especially as family.
Yeah.
And so I think those things are really important. That it can't just be a business relationship. It has to be a family relationship.
Yeah. Oh, that's so important. That's something I've done as well. I've tried to have lunch with my elders, from time to time, just one on one, and that's a big help. And just these various interactions outside of elders meetings, worship, those things. Kind of flip the question now. What's something you think ministers can do to help improve their relationship with elders?
I think ministers need to understand that at times the elders are going to maybe have to take a longer view of things. The way things typically go in our churches is ministers are not at a congregation for, you're an exception in 10 years. Many preachers aren't at the same place for 10 years. And so I think you need to understand if the elders are thinking in terms of what they have seen of the congregation over the last decades and what they expect for the congregation for the next decade. I have seen ministers come in very enthusiastic and push through some program that really affects the congregation, and then they take a different job and they leave the next year, and the congregation's left dealing with that.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be times when the elders maybe say, that's a really good idea, but we don't think it fits our situation. And so I think that's one of the big things I've seen. I've even come to appreciate a bit more the idea of a congregation's history. I don't think we have to be bound by that history, but it really helps in our elders meetings. We have two of our elders who grew up in the congregation.
Okay.
And so they can give us insights that we wouldn't have any other way. And they can tell us of things that happened 30 years ago that affect today.
Yeah.
Why does Sister so-and-so want to keep sitting in the back even though we really need everybody to come sit up at the front?
Yeah.
Well, that's where her family always sat. That's where, her little girl that passed away always sat, and it means a lot to her. That sort of thing that I think elders will tend to have a little more understanding of that sort of part of the congregation. And so I think we need that in a relationship. I think we need the minister to come in and bring fresh ideas and bring a new perspective on things. And I think elders need to be willing to hear that. That can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think the ministers need to recognize that there is a need for grounding and a need for, like I say, not being bound by tradition, but understanding a church's history.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one thing that's helped me, and I think it's exactly what you're saying, maybe put it in a different way, is to understand various gifts. And so, for instance, elders are typically shepherds, but sometimes, elders have various gifts, but just consider them to be shepherds. And maybe you've got a minister come in and he's more mission minded. And sometimes that shepherding and that mission, they're going to come into conflict a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of friction there, and that's okay. You got to work through that, but just kind of understanding that there's going to be a little bit of friction because there's different giftedness, and they're coming from different positions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true. In Ephesians 4, when it's talking about putting up with one another, I think that's because that's right in the framework of a discussion of having different gifts, and that's why we have to put up with one another.
Yeah.
The introverts have to understand the extroverts, and the guys who love a deep textual study every Sunday need to understand the guys who would rather watch a video every Sunday in class. We're in a body, and that's a healthy thing if we can appreciate one another and not try to make everyone be like us.
Yeah, that's great. Now we've been talking a lot about leaders and what are elders to do, what are ministers to do. I want to shift focus for this last question and reflect on the members and what's something that members can do to support and encourage their leaders.
I think trust is a big thing. Um, you know, a friend of mine who was an elder was telling me that at times he wanted to say to people, we're not sitting here in elders meetings trying to destroy this congregation. We are trying to make the best decisions. We are trying to do what seems right to us. And so we do need a degree of trust. I also think honesty is a big part of it. I think we as leaders need to be willing to hear when people disagree, when people have concerns. And I think that members don't do their leaders any favors by not expressing that in a correct way, of course. I'm not talking about standing up and shouting and pointing fingers.
Yeah.
I'm talking going and saying, I'm concerned about this, or could you explain this to me because it doesn't make sense to me why you would make this decision? And maybe the elders have to say there are factors that you can't know about right now. Sometimes there are privacy issues that we can't share with people. We had to let a staff member go, and we couldn't talk about all the reasons. It wouldn't be fair to that person to publicly point out things that we saw that were moral failings, just things that didn't fit our congregation. It wouldn't be right to stand up and discuss those in public.
Yeah.
And yet some people said, well, you're not telling us why you're letting this person go. Well, we can't. Trust us. We need some trust. The other thing, the trust, the honesty, I go back to prayer. I think prayer is such a big thing. I think leaders need to hear from the members, hey, I'm praying for you. I sit down and pray. The last few years before I became an elder, I remember my prayer time just praying, give our elders wisdom, give our leaders wisdom. We were going through some difficult decisions, and all I knew to do was to pray for the leaders, and yet that's not just all I can do. That's a lot.
Oh yeah.
If we can understand the power of prayer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. That's so encouraging to me as a minister. And I know it's a blessing because everyone doesn't receive this, but to hear all the people who are praying for you, that's something not to be taken lightly,
That's right.
That's
right.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we need to really value that.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's taken just as an expression. Oh, I'm praying for you. Oh, well, thanks. But to stop and say, you know what, this, makes a difference. This is how I can do things. I forget which of the famous preachers, you may not know the story. Someone was asking him the secret of his preaching, and he led them to this room, and he said, every Sunday when I'm in the pulpit, we have 5 of our ladies in here praying for my preaching. He said, that's the secret of my preaching.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Tim. Want to, let everybody know how they connect with you. So you've got your blog. And so what's the name of the blog?
You can just put in timothyarcher.com.
Okay.
It'll transition. It's actually the Kitchen of Half-Baked Thoughts is the name of the blog.
Okay.
But if you put timothyarcher.com, it'll do a splash page and then go to the blog.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great resource. I know that you've written several books. I guess your latest was Church Inside Out. Is that correct?
Yes. I did one in Spanish, but the latest one in English is Church Inside Out.
Okay.
Have one, if I can use the expression, within spitting distance of finishing. I need to put a preface and an acknowledgement on it, and we'll have it ready for proofreading anyway.
Yeah.
So we're getting.
Yeah. And you do seminars too, sometimes to go along with those books. I know that you came here to LaGrange and did a seminar on Church Inside Out, and we very much appreciate it. It's well worth it if there's a congregation out there, you know, wanting to focus on mission efforts and kind of, you know, getting the church outside the walls of the building. I would highly recommend having Tim come in and do that. And I guess the way they connect to you is to go through Herald of Truth. Is that right?
Sure, or contact me directly. Either way works.
Yeah.
And I will say that there is a lot of good stuff in the seminars because a lot of it is an original. And so I think one of the things that I try to do is gather ideas that maybe people won't find on their own and bring them in. Um, and so I won't say that my ideas are necessarily the most wonderful, but I do feel like I have a gift for spotting other people's good ideas. So I try to bring those in and share them.
Yeah. Well, all right, Tim. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for all the great wisdom that you shared with us. I know it's going to bless many people.
Oh, sure, Scott. Thanks for the chance to visit.